Hi everyone, this is Sam with Wine News in 5. Before I get to global news, a couple of exciting bits of news from our team. Walter Speller, JancesRobinson.com's Italy editor, chatted with Hugo Brooks on the Premier Cru podcast about his path to becoming a wine writer, as well as Brunello 2020. You can also listen to me chat with Matthew Weiss on the Wine-Centric Show, where we touch on everything from wine and health to farming and the changing face of wine journalism. Meanwhile, this week, Julia, Jancis, and Tam have been hard at work filling our tasting note database with notes on the hundreds of 2023 Burgundies shown during London's Burgundy Week, and we have re-released another episode of Vintner's Tales on YouTube, this one on the late Michael Broadbent. Broadbent was a prolific writer and published over a dozen books, the most popular being Michael Broadbent's Wine Tasting and the Great Vintage Wine Book. Most of his professional career was spent at Christie's, creating their specialized wine department and launching wine auctions. Our team has managed to locate more Vintner's Tales, so we'll continue our re-release project through February. But if you or anyone else you know has access to 1998 episodes featuring Howard Ripley or Arabella Woodrow, MW, please email me at news@jancesrobinson.com. We're hoping someone might have recorded them on VHS. On to the news. Today I'll discuss the wildfires in LA, the ICCPUD report on alcohol and health, updates to Collio DOC, Casella Family Brands sustainable certification, the increase in grapevine-trunk disease in Alsace, and the passing of Dr. Anita Oberholster. First up, wildfires in LA. While there are no vineyards in the burn zone, the LA wildfires have affected wine professionals, restaurants, and wine shops. The fires have been burning since January 7th and have killed 27 people, destroyed 12,000 structures, and prompted evacuations for 200,000 people. If you're looking for ways to help, Food and Wine magazine is keeping an updated list of hospitality relief organizations and GoFundMes for restaurants and hospitality professionals seeking help. I'll link to the list in the transcript of this newscast. On to the ICCPUD report on alcohol and health. The Interagency Coordinating Committee on the Prevention of Underage Drinking, the ICCPUD, which is a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services committee, published a draft report of its alcohol intake and health study on January 14th. Posted on stopalcoholabuse.gov, the report states, among the U.S. population, the risk of dying from alcohol use begins at low levels of average use. Higher levels of alcohol consumption are linked with progressively higher mortality risk. Depending on the level of use, men are at similar risk of health harms from alcohol use compared to women. In the United States, males and females have a 1 in 1,000 risk of dying from alcohol use if they consume more than 7 drinks per week. This risk increases to 1 in 100 if they consume more than 9 drinks per week. This report directly contradicts the NASEM report commissioned by the U.S. Congress and published on December 17th, which found with moderate certainty that moderate alcohol consumption, 1 drink a day for women and 2 for men, lowered all-cause mortality. The NASEM report was authored by 14 scientists, aided by 9 researchers and 3 consultants from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. It was peer-reviewed by another 12 scientists. In contrast, the ICCPUD report was authored by 6 individuals, 2 of whom belonged to the 2023 Canadian research team that proposed changing Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines, but ultimately failed to do so because medical researchers and scientists found that they had used faulty methodology and used their own research to make recommendations. The ICCPUD report pulls only from observational studies rather than utilizing data from randomized controlled trials. And the report states, we also modeled the total alcohol-specific mortality at different levels of consumption based on all alcohol-related conditions. They included infectious diseases such as tuberculosis, pneumonia, HIV, and coronavirus among alcohol-attributable health conditions, in addition to a variety of cancers, cardiovascular diseases, neurological diseases such as epilepsy, and injuries. They claim to use condition-specific relative risk curves to estimate the burden of disease attributable to alcohol use, but nowhere in the report did I find a relative risk curve or a breakdown of the level of relation between moderate alcohol consumption and each condition. The report later states, these risks can then be combined to estimate the risk for total alcohol-specific mortality. I don't know if this ICCPUD report is written to be deliberately confusing or just poorly written, but the report is in stark contrast to the clearly reported scientific methodology described in the NASEM report. HHS and USDA will open a comment period for the public to submit written feedback on both the NASEM and the ICCPUD reports later this month. These comments will help to decide what research is used in writing the dietary guidelines for Americans. And I strongly urge you to read both reports and to submit comments. Next, updates to Collio DOC. Decanter reports that in early December, at a meeting of the Consorzio Vini Collio, 72% of wine growers in Collio DOC voted to include an orange wine category in the appellation's production rules. The category will be called Vino da Uve Macerate. The technical details are still being finalized, but some regulations have already been agreed upon. The minimum time on skins will be 7 days. The maximum volatile acidity will be the same as red wines at 1.2 grams per liter of acetic acid, and a Pantone scale, which is a standardized way of indicating wine color, will be established. The Pantone scale will enable producers to print a graphic representation on their label that indicates where on the color scale for orange wine their wine sits, which is similar to Alsace's sweetness scale graphic. These changes still need to be approved by the Italian Ministry and European Commission, which the consortium expects to take about a year. On to Casella Family Brands sustainable certification. On January 17th, Wine Titles reported that Casella Family Brands, CFB, famous for Yellowtail, had achieved vineyard certification with Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. The certification is administered by the Australian Wine Research Institute and based on global best practices. Given that SWA's requirements do not disallow the use of pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides, including glyphosate, this may not seem so impressive. On the other hand, CFB was responsible for 12% of Australia's total grape crush last year, so it's great that everything is being documented and looked after to the level guaranteed by the SWA. On to the increase in grapevine-trunk disease in Alsace. On January 9th, the French publication Vitisphere reported that incidences of grapevine-trunk disease, including Esca, Botrysphaera, and Eutypa in Alsace, increased by 4%. The increase is thought to be a result of particularly wet weather conditions in 2024. Finally, the passing of Dr. Anita Oberholster. Dr. Anita Oberholster, an enology professor in the UC Davis Department of Viticulture and Enology, died on January 11th at the age of 50. Oberholster was from South Africa, worked in her home country and in Australia before moving to California, where she joined the faculty at UC Davis in 2011. In 2020, when fires hit the west coast of the US, she spearheaded a collaboration with the California Department of Food and Agriculture to conduct commercial analysis of wine and grape samples, as well as sharing her unpublished but validated testing method to detect the 7 compounds that were used to indicate smoke exposure in grapes and wine. As a winery intern in 2020, I sat in on webinars with her as she very patiently explained best practices for testing for smoke taint and for procuring lab analysis. She was a rare academic who took as much pleasure in the slow work of explaining how to use her research as she did in actually conducting her research. I think I speak for most of the West Coast in saying that I will miss her. That's all for this episode of the Wine News. If you enjoyed this newscast and you'd like to see it continue, please subscribe to jancesrobinson.com. And if you have breaking news in your area, please email news@jancesrobinson.com. Thanks.